Hello folks, and welcome back for the third episode of Burn Cartridges. My name is Michael Burns, and on this series we go through and pick 4 different games from eras of video game history and just kind of give them a go. We delved into the early console era and looked at VCS game Mario Bros, as well as the arcade era where we looked at Marble Madness. This time we're going back to home consoles for the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat. And it is important to note that this is the Super Nintendo version because there's actually some controversy about that because it is different from both the arcade version and the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is a game that was developed by Ed Boon, programmed by John Tobias, and its main draw was its sensational violence. There's gallons of blood, there's gory fatalities. It's a pretty brutal game, and that's what drew tons of people to this game in the arcade and made it a smash hit that would translate super well to home consoles. However, the idea of all of this gore coming to the home consoles was pretty controversial, and so Nintendo, facing some pressure from parents, actually decided to censor the game. The blood was changed to gray so it resembled sweat, and some of the fatalities were removed. The Sega Genesis game also did censor the game, but with a simple cheat code you could unlock all of the content that had been cut out. On the Super Nintendo version, not so much. There was no way to access that content, and it was just taken out completely. And that was a pretty big thing for the fans, because people that liked Mortal Kombat were there for the blood a lot of the time. And so there was a lot of pushback to Nintendo's decision on this, and they heard that pretty loud and clear, because when they worked on the sequel to Mortal Kombat, all of the blood was there, the fatalities were there, and it maintained the idea of Mortal Kombat. It's really interesting looking at all of the sequels to Mortal Kombat because it's obviously a huge game franchise that is still around today. That with each installment, with each new Mortal Kombat game, it gets bigger, it gets gorier, it gets even more ridiculous. So even though Mortal Kombat came into the fighting genre after Street Fighter II and large names like that, it still is a huge influence on the genre as a whole, and it continued to kind of attempt to one-up itself every single time. So that's enough blathering on from me. Let's hop into the game as quickly as possible. I apologize in advance to anybody who is actually good at Mortal Kombat. I've never really been exposed to fighting games. They weren't really my cup of tea, and it's never been on my radar. The original Mortal Kombat came out 6 years before I was born, and I haven't actually played a Mortal Kombat in any true fashion throughout my lifetime. So it's a really new experience for me to be exposed to this. And on top of that, it's a very difficult game, in my opinion, just because the button presses are difficult, and especially when you don't exactly know what button corresponds to what, because I am playing on an emulator and not an original Super Nintendo, unfortunately. So it does make things a little bit more difficult. But as you can see, just kind of looking at the game, it looks kind of shockingly good for the era that it came out in. And part of the reason for that is Mortal Kombat actually had digitized images of its fighters. So these are images of real people that have been taken and put into the game to add just a little bit of realism. And it really pays off. And you can also see, like, in the background, the monks were applauding when a round was won. It has a very dynamic and cool feel to it that you do still feel in modern day Mortal Kombat games. Even though I haven't played them, I have still seen them, and so I know about like the interesting backgrounds, and you have the cool environmental moves and stuff like that. And you also see that, like, when we get to this point with the finisher in any nowadays Mortal Kombat game, you would have ripped somebody's heart out or taken their spine out. That's not happening in this game, and it's missing all of that blood and all of that violence that made the series so catching and so such a draw for a lot of people. And it's a really interesting part of video game history that's missing from this game. I'm gonna let my character kind of get destroyed here for the next couple of seconds while I kind of wrap this up, because this has been a really interesting experience to me. Like I said, I haven't really been exposed to fighting games very much. They just haven't been on my radar at all. But I really enjoyed getting a chance to look at this. It still plays really smoothly, even though I am playing on an emulator. It's still really fun to play. It's really enjoyable, and I can see why it's so fun to jump into when you like really nail the correct button presses and pull off a really cool move. It's very satisfying and really fun. Really, the only complaints that I would have with this game are the complaints that were around in '91 when it came out, and that is the lack of gore, the lack of brutality that made Mortal Kombat such a mainstay in the first place. And of course the controls being super wonky, but that is because I'm playing on an emulator. But overall, it's really, really fun to look at a game that the entire genre I'd never really been exposed to, and particularly this game that has been so influential in the genre as a whole. So I really hope that all of you enjoyed taking a look back at Mortal Kombat. I certainly enjoyed my time, and make sure that you come back next week or the next time for the 4th episode of Burn Cartridges. It will be the last episode, so we're finishing up our tour of video game history here. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it, and have a lovely day.